So when I was a teacher, I realized, as hard as I'm working, and I see the other teachers that work in the school, they are exhausted, and a lot of them are on autopilot. And me coming in here fresh, coming in here passionate, I still know that my kids are not getting the best of me and they're not getting the best experience that is going to really expose their potential. So I knew my kids, I will homeschool them because I want them to have the best opportunities. And then when I had my first child, I started looking into curriculums and I didn't find something what I had envisioned, so I decided to make it myself, and here we are.
Welcome to Homeschool Talks, a podcast by HSLDA. This is a show about all things homeschooling, from practical tips to inspiring stories and everything in between. You can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes as well as upcoming guests and topics, sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. We're so glad you've joined us today, and we hope you enjoyed the program. Here's your host.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Will Estrada, Senior Counsel at the Homeschool Legal Defense Association. I'm a homeschool graduate and a homeschool dad, and it's great to be guest hosting for HSLDA President Jim Mason today. My guest today is Houlie Duque. Welcome to Homeschool Talks, Houlie. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
My friends, Houlie Duque is a homeschool mom, teacher, and founder of HomeschoolToGo. Houlie has over 10 years in experience teaching Waldorf, Montessori, and Cambridge curricula. She focuses on training first-time homeschoolers to adopt an enjoyable and sustainable homeschooling lifestyle. Houlie, we are excited to have you join us today to talk a little bit more about your homeschool journey and to discuss homeschooling in your generation and in your community. Can you let our audience know more about who you are and what this is and what you're doing with the homeschooling community?
Thank you, Will. Of course, it is such a pleasure for me to be here. The HSLDA, this organization has done so much for the homeschooling community in the world. And to me, it really is an honor. I used your resources as one of my main sources when I was first creating my organization. And I've attended several of your events, including the National Leaders Conference. And it's been truly inspiring to work alongside the incredible work and the incredible impact that you're making throughout my career. So I thank you for that. And thank you for bringing me on board to your podcast.
Absolutely.
So you said to share a little bit else about who I am or about HomeschoolToGo. So HomeschoolToGo, I always explain it to, long story short, is we're the only bilingual and holistic program in the world. As you can see, there's a lot of homeschool resources that have kind of come out in the last little bit and over the last 40 years. But when I first began looking into homeschooling for my children, I realized there was no curriculum out there that was that had, let's say, the project based in the resources that I was looking for, but was also bilingual through immersion, which is how I learned English. So I always, to try and explain it quickly, what is HomeschoolToGo? We are the only holistic and bilingual curriculum in the world at the moment. And I'll dive a little bit deeper as we move on through the interview because I don't want to go too long right now.
I want to ask more about HomeschoolToGo, but what you said just really sparked my interest because you said that you obviously didn't grow up in the United States. And so let's go back to the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing. You grew up in Colombia. And so tell our listeners a little bit about that and kind of how that laid the groundwork for what you're doing today.
Of course. I grew up in Colombia. And I attended a Cambridge school throughout my entire education. And so I seen firsthand how bilingual education really sets you aside to succeed in multiple careers and multiple backgrounds. Like, I'm just not talking professionally, but relationally and socially, etc. And so I always used my bilingualism as an asset. And I think for any parent who's already bilingual, it's maybe like a little bit of a nightmare to raise a child that speaks only one language. So I knew for me, this was a main standard. And I also know for a lot of parents that perhaps are not super fluent in a second language, especially in the United States, teaching Spanish is something that is attractive and is one of the most powerful tools you can give to your child in the education. But I also attended a school that was very high standards of education, was Cambridge education, project based. I in that system, I was always very academically successful, but not naturally. So what happened was when I was in first grade, I didn't really do that well in mathematics. And I remember, like, this is a memory that I have ingrained in my brain. My mom sat with me for 3 months to help me get those math concepts that were first grade. So it's like the beginning of everything, right? Like at that point, your potential and the vulnerability of your actions is so huge, right? Like you can go one road or the other, depending on where you put yourself. And I remember after those 3 months of working at home with my mom, I was significantly more confident in my academic abilities. And from that point on, I was like top of the class until I graduated. So that experience always stayed with me. And I think it was maybe one of the reasons why I became a teacher. It was just so natural for me. My mom was a teacher, and so she had a lot of students that perhaps were not doing well in their class, because as a one teacher you can't always serve everybody. And I remember my mom, knowing that I was such a good student and was so good at explaining things, she was like, Houlie, do you want to tutor some of my students? And so it started there. I was only in middle school. I already started tutoring. And
wait, so you were tutoring and teaching in middle school when you were a middle school student?
Yes. And then also when I was in high school, I used to do these like study guides. Like I would do like review the entire term because I had really good notes, and I would do these study guides with pictures to help kids, like to help myself understand and study better all the concepts for the tests. And then my friends would be so into it, they would buy them from me. So I actually had a business on the side.
So you were teaching, you were still in school, and you were also an entrepreneur there as well, making money off your friends.
Think so, yeah. It's always been a passion of mine, even before I realized, like I maybe didn't really look to teach as a career, because I always in my heart desired to have more impact. I think God put in my heart a lot of dedication and a lot of hard work, because I was, dedicated, and I knew that I one day would be able to help many. And so I never thought teaching would allow me that, but I eventually ended up teaching because it was just such a natural thing, and it just became so easy to get my training and get really good jobs in teaching. So that's what I ended up doing in the beginning of my career.
Houlie, tell us a little bit about when you were teaching in schools, because I think that's very impactful in what you're doing now and helping homeschoolers as well. So tell us a little bit about that. Graduate from high school, you go on to teaching, education. Tell us about that.
Yes. So when I first became a teacher, like my first teaching job was actually at the same school where I went to, the Cambridge school. And I remember that my boss, who had also been my teacher when I was like way younger, she said to me, like, she came to review one of my classes, and she just told me, Houlie, you're a natural. Like we were all, like we're a high standard school, like you're a first time teacher. We were like trying to figure out, like, eyes were on you to make sure that you could live up to the teacher that you were replacing, the reason we hired you. And she said, and you really are a natural, you're really meant for this. And I know that was true, because the connection that I had with my students was true. Like I truly cared for each one of those kids so much. And I know that connection was really what encouraged them the most in learning. And so I guess one part of the story is that I didn't love teaching so much, because it was very overwhelming for me to want to give absolutely everything of myself to each one of these students. Didn't feel like the system was conducive for that, because it's too many kids needing too much, and you can't adapt your teaching style to each one of the students, and that's the best way to teach them. So I was constantly frustrated and exhausted by being pulled in so many directions. So as much as I love teaching, I didn't love teaching in the school system. And so that was one side of it. I would always be like, the school year will be done and I would go back to like other businesses and other endeavors that I had. And the school will pull me back like, please, can you just teach for this semester? We have this class that needs an 8th grade. So I was able to teach all the way kindergarten, all the way to grade 12, because I taught in all the grades of the school. And every time, like, I would be there teaching for grade 8, and I had been there before for grade 4, and all the kids would like find me in the hallway and run to me like, Miss Houlie, please come back to our class. Like, I realized it was so much about connection. It's really what the teaching, the magic of teaching is all about, is connecting. And so I knew that I had a gift in teaching, and I knew also that when I had my children, I wasn't gonna let somebody else teach them, because I knew that the best way to do that and to really expose their talents and their gifts was not through, being a setting where you have a 1:18 ratio or more or less. So that was my experience in the school. I always also identified there was always, let's say there's always like top 5 students, maybe like 3 to 5 students that are significantly better than the others. And I try to, because I taught so many different ages and for so long, to identify what was that factor. And it was not necessarily that this kid was smarter, because sometimes you would have smart kids that just weren't at the top, or that didn't, it was whether the parents were involved in their education or not. So what I found about all of those kids that were always at the top was that there was always dedicated parents behind it. And it all clicked for me, because I was like, oh my goodness, when I was in kindergarten going into 1st grade and I wasn't passing math, and my mom sat with me for a whole summer to make sure that I could do this. That was the thing that changed me for the entire path, and the experience that a student has in a school setting does translate to the rest of their life, in the sense that your confidence, like, I was able to see myself at the top of the class going through school. So I knew in my head and in my spirit that I could do things, that I could, have big goals. Whereas you have students that perhaps have an immense potential, but because they don't respond to the academic demands of a school, they sit in the back of the class and they think that they're not meant for success, and has an incredible strain in their confidence and in their career, in their path in life. And so I think that's something that homeschooling can completely overcome, because you don't have to, as a person, as an individual, as a growing child, adapt to a very specific set of skills that, to be able to be recognized. So
that is incredibly powerful, Houlie. I was on your Instagram page. You have thousands of people who follow you, and it's quite impactful, I think, what you're doing on Instagram. But in one of the videos I was watching, you talk about your own journey as a mother, and you said something that the biggest legacy is our kids, and you were telling the person who was also on the podcast that if people are struggling with what significance of what is my purpose, one thing that you can know is if you're a mom, you are doing an eternal significance there. So before we talk about homeschooling, just tell me a little bit more about that, as what you learned with being a mother.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like in our culture, in our society, there's so much focus on, being successful and attaining recognition, and at the end of the day, when you really come down to it, like once you become a parent, a lot changes, right? And I'm sure you know this from your own experience, but I find there was a clear point in my life where I realized it's not about, if I can raise my children to be happy, fulfilled, and if I can be truly present, what's the point? Like, because you want to be successful in your career, but for what? right? Like at the end of the day, what you want to create is impact. And sure, as a professional, you'll have impact on the people that you work with. You will have impact on whatever product you're developing or whatever task that you have. You'll have impact on those people through your career. But the most immense and tremendous amount of impact that you will have on anybody will be your children. So if you can really double down on your parenting and you can make that priority rather than your career, and like it's so common for our society to be a full-time professional who only sees their kids at the end of the day, and their kids are being raised by everybody else but them because they share the minority of the time in their day when they're both tired. And I find for me that's the opposite of what the priority should be, right? So yeah, so that's what I was trying to convey in that video with the tired dad. He's a really awesome father who also is spreading an incredible message.
You said something there of being fully present. Can you flesh that out a little bit? What does that mean? My wife mentions that to me. I've heard other moms mention that of I want to be present with my children, fully present. What does that mean?
Yes, absolutely. It really means that you are not thinking of other things or letting other distractions take your attention during the time that you're sharing with your children. Because at the end of the day, if you give your children that presence and that attention, you will watch them flourish. That is all that a child needs. Like when they're little kids in kindergarten and they're like, look what I can do. That is what they are in the constant search for. And from experience, but also from studies, I know this to be one of the most determining factors in the flourishing and the becoming of an individual. And that's something that's just with HomeschoolToGo is what we try to do is we give parents the tools so that they don't have to do planning. They don't have to do, the research. They don't have to do all these things. They can literally just print out the activity and sit down with their kids and be truly present in doing these with them and let them respond to the material to be able to learn from them. So when I say truly present, it really is as simple as that, is sitting down eye level with your child and doing something together when you're not distracted by external responsibilities.
So, Houlie, you're a mom. You're wanting to be present with your child. And then what made you decide, I'm going to be a homeschool mom? I'm going to homeschool. We're going to do this together. Tell me a little bit of that journey.
Oh, for sure. So when I was a teacher, I realized, as hard as I'm working and I see the other teachers that work in this school, they are exhausted and a lot of them are on autopilot. And me coming in here fresh, coming in here passionate, I still know that my kids are not getting the best of me and they're not getting the best experience that is going to really expose their potential. So I knew my kids, I will homeschool them because I want them to have the best opportunities. So yeah, that's how it all started. And then when I had my first child, I started looking into curriculums and I didn't find something that I considered good enough or quality enough or what I had envisioned, so I decided to make it myself, and here we are. I've been fortunate enough to be connected with so many parents that were looking for that exact same things.
I want to ask you about that though. So you're starting, I remember you said at the beginning that you wanted to have that bilingual education and you're just not finding things that are helping you to be present with your child and to have this quality education and bilingual. So tell me the genesis of HomeschoolToGo.
Yeah. So, I mean, when you look at what is out there right now, and there's a lot of really beautiful resources. I'm not trying to say anything, the thing is that I found a lot of them are academic. And what I have found, like writing and reading material and academic curriculums, there are more ways, more types of learning: visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and then read and write. And I find that most kids, from my experience, they're very kinesthetic. They like hands-on activities. And also the difference between academic and project-based is that academic is a little bit extrapolated from real life application. Like let's say you're going to learn about science. In life, when you're walking into a situation, it's not separated like, okay, now you're about to do something science. Now you're about to do something. It's like all together. So, so I realized there, I found a way to be able to teach all of those subjects together in a project that would keep the child engaged, because when the child doesn't find a direct correlation between what they're learning and the real life application, they lose interest immediately. And that's something that happens at a very natural, very subconscious level. Like a high school, middle school student will ask you, but a little child, they won't ask. They'll just become disengaged because they just don't see the correlation. And that's why sometimes when we're trying to teach kids to read at 4 years old or 5 years old, and they don't really have an interest in reading because they don't understand the world enough to know that you need to read to be able to navigate it, they lose interest. And then as teachers, we think this is a milestone for the age, we better push it. And then you start pushing it, and then you create a disconnect in like the child doesn't love the learning anymore. And truly, you want to keep that relationship between the child and learning so protected, because that's what's going to make them push themselves, challenge themselves, dig deeper, and really explore their talents to the fullest potential. So I didn't find a curriculum with those features. And then I also wanted it to be English and Spanish. So I created it first, and then I translated it to both languages so that the parents could interchange from one day to the other. And then that way you teach through immersion, which is how you learn in real life. Right? It's like we were just talking about you going on a trip, and it's like before going there, if you try to learn from a book, maybe you'll learn like a fifth of what you will learn while you're there in the actual real life situation. So that's what it's about. I'm trying to make it these fun activities and projects that you can do in the two languages. And I had only found so far like a Spanish class or a Spanish credit on top of all the other classes, and it was all very separated. So I wanted to make it very natural, and also for the journey to be sort of like the parent will give the kid enough options so they could learn about the child's learning interest as well as their learning styles.
I'm a homeschool graduate, Houlie. My wife is also a homeschool graduate, and we're homeschooling our two boys. They're 11 and 7, so I guess we're second generation homeschoolers. But something my parents did with my home education and my siblings was really do just that, of kind of instilling a love of learning, independence. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you foster independence and that love of learning in your own child's journey, whether for our listeners or you as a homeschool mom with your child. How do you foster that love of learning, that independence in education with your children?
So the project-based methodology really allows you to do that, because you kind of give the child a goal and some resources and some tools, and the child is the one leading through the path. So it also allows for creativity to come in. I also have used a lot of Montessori tools, because Montessori specializes in raising autonomous children. So to give you an example, for my 4-year-old, creating a folding board. It's like most people think, oh, a 3-year-old can't fold their laundry. Yes, they can. You just have to give them the tools. So it's a lot of that. It's a lot of rather than sit down, let's learn. It's a lot of, okay, here's your environment. Here are the things that you need to accomplish in your day to day and what you think that they can accomplish. And then there is what they can actually accomplish, which is usually higher than what you think they can accomplish. So I find that's a way that I foster independence, just by providing tools and letting them be challenged by the situation, and then obviously along the way offering the support necessary so that they don't feel alone. But ultimately, I think I always say this to the parents that I work with. It's like, you don't want the child to feel super overwhelmed by the learning material. You also don't want it to feel that it's super easy, because that's boring. You kind of have to find a way to keep them on that verge of challenge without it feeling too overwhelming. So it's a delicate balance for sure to foster independence, I believe.
Well, I love that. I love what the Irish poet William Butler Yeats said about education, that education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. And I think you're doing that both with your kids and with Homeschool to Go and that program. So my hat's off to you on that.
Thank you so much. And also to you for second generation homeschooler. That is amazing.
It's pretty cool. We have a good time about it. I one of the other things that struck me looking at your Instagram feed is you are outside with your children and you love being outside. I think in one of the videos you say that's important to you for your own mental health and physical health. Talk to our listeners a little bit about, I think, the importance of being outside in the great outdoors with your kids.
Yes. So one of the things that we specialize in is helping the parents schedule their days because, in this generation of homeschoolers, it's not just stay-at-home moms. Our economy is a little bit more demanding than that. And so we find a lot of homeschoolers that are both parents work and they take shift work and sometimes they're entrepreneurs, sometimes there's very different setups. And so scheduling and programming or structuring your homeschool is a big deal, and it's very I think it's one of the most important factors in today's homeschooling day and age. So going outside, I always explain to the homeschoolers or to the new homeschooling families, you want to balance your day out between contractive and expansive activities. And the contractive activities are those that are mental and that require that you have some focus and you sit down and you kind of like bring your focus into a tiny or small area. And then the contractive is more physical. And what's so easy about contractive is that if you go outside, you'll find a plethora of resources to exercise so many skills and milestones that you have for that specific age, and just in letting your kids interact with what's outside. And so what I do is we give week packages. So the week packages have like certain topics that they would cover. And then a lot of that is on how you can cover those while being outside, or things that you can do when you're outside to reinforce those concepts that you're working on learning that week, and help those parents balance out the contractive and expansive activities for sure.
So we've talked about Montessori. We've talked about being outdoors. Let's go in a slightly different direction. What about technology? How has technology influenced both your own homeschooling approach, but also your curriculum?
Absolutely. So technology is a tricky one because it is so powerful. Technology is so powerful. And I think one of the biggest blessings involved with technology is that through that medium that is technology, we can impact more people, right? So without technology, it would be really hard for me to help as many parents as I do today.
I mean, you're in Canada right now and I'm in Northern Virginia, so technology is here.
Right. But I think like everything, it's very important to be aware of the balance, and screens are definitely not the best for our kids, especially in large amounts. So how we do it, or how we balance that out, is we use our platform for the parents to be able to see their progress, to book their appointments with the teachers that are doing their follow-ups, to fill out their assessments. And then they have the resources on the platform to download, so they can print them out and they can disconnect from the distractions that can be highly stimulating on the screen. So our curriculum does not demand that the parent or the family stays on the screen for more than 10 minutes a day. Like sometimes there'll be a video here and there to do, and again, technology can be great, all the information available, but at the end of the day, research is only one stage of the entire process. So you research, then you execute, then you present. Those two components of a project can completely be done off the screen. And so we leverage that fully, and we use platform or technology just as a way of transmitting the information rather than demanding that the kid is there interacting with the screen, right? Like, there's some research, and then there's go interview these people about this specific subject. And we make sure that we take those kids outside and to interact with others as well.
That's fantastic. Kind of looking larger scale, Houlie, as we come near the end of our podcast today, for younger families who are entering homeschooling, or if there's someone maybe who's listening and public school is just not working for them and they're thinking about homeschooling, how do you support and encourage these families?
Yes, I love that question. It's the new generation of homeschooler is most of us millennial parents who perhaps we do work and perhaps we do have other professional responsibilities. And so it's important that you create a schedule, and it's important that you systemize your time. I call it the family rhythm. When I do this course with the families, like before they start the curriculum, the first thing I do is let's go through your family rhythm and adjust it so that you can be fully present when you're working and fully present when you're with your kids. And I guess just to put it like it is a process that we go through, but just to give one actionable item here on this interview today, one thing that is very useful is making sure that you split your days in the week between the homeschool days or the family days and the work days. Mm-hmm. So there's going to be some days, as a homeschooler, don't need to be doing work behind a table every day. And perhaps if you do one or two projects throughout the week, your children are going to have enough information to extrapolate to day-to-day activities. So you can make sure that you're with them present 3 times a week, and then you can dedicate your other 4 days to your work. If you can separate those rather than trying to do both every day, you will do yourself a big favor, because you'll be able to give your kids that presence, and as well as you give your work and your responsibilities that presence as well. And then the second tip real quick is involving your kids in the chores of the home, because that's at first is a little bit harder, but then once it kicks in, you just created teamwork, you've just created, responsibility, autonomy, etc. And I'm sure, Will, you can agree with that one yourself.
Does it work though? Do your kids always help out with the chores?
Yes, they do. It's not always the easiest, but it is a lot easier now than it was at the beginning when I first established the system. But you do have to put a system in place for sure to make that actually be effective. But that's another thing. I help my parents with, but it does require a little bit of a longer conversation that we probably won't be able to finish today.
Well, Houlie, you are just an inspiration. You're a mom, you're a homeschool mom, you're an entrepreneur, you're helping just so many other homeschoolers and parents with this. But I want to close out by asking you, what would you tell either a homeschool mom or homeschool dad who's discouraged right now? Homeschooling is maybe not going well and they're struggling with their children, and it's not what they had hoped it would be. What would you tell that mom or dad who might be listening to this podcast today?
I will tell them that usually this is something that I hear from the moms in the first 3 months after they've began homeschooling. When you are changing from your usual rhythm, from your usual habits, that's going to be the most difficult season of the process. So if you've been doing it for 2 years and you're struggling, perhaps it's time you stop and you take a step back and you try to reassess your process. But if you've only been doing it for 3 months or less, or you're in your first year, my advice is be patient with yourself. And also, big thing that a lot of moms do is you're asking too much of yourself. It's like homeschool is not like normal school when they have to be doing so much, 5-7 hours a day, every day. Like it doesn't work that way. You can be a lot more efficient with your time, and you kind of have to reprogram yourself from that rat race mentality that usually is instilled in the school. So those are the two things that I would say. Give yourself more time to experience, and also be easier on yourself, and maybe go a little bit slower.
Those are some good words of wisdom, Houlie. My guest today has been HomeschoolToGo founder, Houlie Duque, homeschool mom, educator. Thank you again for joining me today, Houlie, and thank you everyone for listening. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please share with your friends. If you would like to get upcoming podcast episodes delivered right to your inbox, sign up for our Homeschool Talks email list. Subscribers will receive exclusive content. Thank you so much, Houlie, for coming on Homeschool Talks today and sharing this wisdom with our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me, Will.
Today's program is made possible by HSLDA's Member Savings Program. Did you know that your HSLDA membership can pay for itself with our specially negotiated discounts on products and services? You can save on expenses like rental cars, hotel reservations, technology, curriculum, school supplies, and more. And we're continually adding more discounts. Visit our website at hslda.org/member savings for an up-to-date list. That's hslda.org/member savings. Thanks for listening to this episode of Homeschool Talks. If you've enjoyed this conversation, will you do us a favor by sharing it with a friend or leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with our other Homeschool Talks conversations at hslda.org/podcast. And if you want to be the first to know about new episodes as well as upcoming guests and topics, you can sign up for our email list using the link in the show notes. That's all for now. We hope you enjoyed this program, and we'll see you next time.